I get the ultimate revenge on an identity thief. To set the stage, it was 2005 and I was living on my own. I had a girlfriend, my own apartment, and a paid-off used car. I was working as the assistant manager of a gas station. I made decent money for the time and was living comfortably, but I was far from being rich. My younger brother, Kyle, was living with me at the time. He had serious behavioral problems, oppositional defiance disorder, ADHD, etc., some of which were due to a shared rough upbringing, abuse of a serious nature. He had nowhere to go, as the rest of my family refused to deal with him. In their defense, he did lie, cheat, and steal on a daily basis, and had a drug habit. He even broke my arm deliberately once. I was trying to do the right thing and get him on track. I got him a job, took him to work, gave him some spending money, and allowed him to live rent-free. The rules were simple. I didn't care if he smoked weed, but it wouldn't be in my apartment. Drugs would not cross into my apartment. One day, I decided to surprise my girlfriend with 9-inch Nails tickets at the Tabernacle in Atlanta for her birthday. They were her favorite band. I had this planned months in advance, and ended up working a double shift the night of the concert, and driving down there due to some sudden personnel issues at work. When I got back the following morning, which I had off, I stopped by my work to make sure there were no more sudden schedule changes. My manager, Betty Jo, saw me and had a look on her face that I had only seen the day she got robbed. I knew it was bad. She sat me down and explained that Kyle had tried to get a ride to a spot in town that was notorious for selling drugs. Kyle admitted he was trying to sell a significant quantity of weed and coke to a coworker, which could have cost me my job. I got up and peeled out in the parking lot, headed for home, which was literally 40 seconds away. He broke the rules. He knew it was the only way to get immediately removed. It was even in writing, because I made him sign a letter stating the rules. So I ejected him from the apartment that day despite his protests. Fast forward 4 months. He would call me occasionally and update me on how he was doing. He said he got a new job making a ton of money. I congratulated him. I was saving money since kicking him out. I didn't pay attention to my balance, as I keep a running tally in my head. My girlfriend decided we should go to the beach for the weekend, as I had a rare weekend off. I went to withdraw $300 so we could have a blast. Insufficient funds. I thought there had to be an error, so I tried again. Same error. I went home and checked my bank statement. I was over $9,500 shy of where I should have been. I checked my statements. There were huge cash withdrawals every day up to the maximum allowed limit day after day after day. $900 at AT&T, an astronomical sum at that time. Hundreds of dollars at liquor stores, clothes, dozens of transactions I never made, etc. I printed my statements and went directly to the large regional branch. I was told it was definitely identity theft and that it was unusual because it was in the north of my town. I was told to get anything back, I had to turn the investigation over to the bank, so I did. A few days later, I got a phone call from the officer investigating. He asked to meet. He had a stack of printed photos, almost a foot high, as every transaction on an ATM takes a picture. Do you know this guy? I informed the detective that it was Kyle. The investigator told me Kyle had the money to evade police for a long time if he desired, and no stable address or job to be picked up at, so it would be a long shot to find him. I told my buddy Rick from here on out what happened. Rick was a gruff, 6 feet 4 inches Native American man who was well-muscled from a life of hard labor. Rick was a good person, but if you screwed with him or his friends, he was devious and loved scorched earth tactics. You didn't bring small problems to him. He immediately offered to help. We became friends after I found out he was sleeping with Betty Jo, who was a little person 4 feet 8 inches in heels. He came into the store, and I started laughing because the mental image was too much. He said, "What are you smiling at, gay slur?" We were friends ever since. Now Kyle loved Rick despite the fact that Rick was a massive asshole to him on a regular basis. Kyle wanted his approval desperately. We concocted a plan. Rick would call Kyle, get him to come over under the guise that I had a falling out with Rick over the way I treated Kyle. Naturally, Kyle ate the story hook, line, and sinker. Kyle gave Rick an address to meet, an abandoned car wash in the north of town. We loaded up his truck. The trap was set. Rick hops out of the truck and tells Kyle to get in. I was lying down in the front seat, so he couldn't see me. He opens the door, and I put him in a headlock and pull him in. We go back to Rick's place while my brother visibly sweats and even cries at some points. We cooked him dinner and calmly sat down, ate, and then cleaned up. The entire time, Kyle had convinced himself he was about to get murdered in the woods. We gave him a chance to explain himself. Naturally, as was his way, he lied, denied, and swore on everyone living and dead that he had nothing to do with it. I grabbed a stack of photos from the investigator and silently slid them across the table. Again, he denied everything. This was a setup. You're trying to make me a felon. I did nothing wrong. I had had enough. I called the non-emergency number, and the police came to pick him up. We said he showed up unexpectedly and started to get violent. When they searched him, he had OxyContin, a felony, and he tried to assault me in front of the officer, screaming about how we set him up, and all of this was unjust. He ended up getting arrested on something like 350 felonies. As every transaction crossed state lines, this was pled down to 1 or 2 felonies. Carl ended up getting 5 years with early release in 3. I think this was because, despite his checkered past, the family never pressed charges, so his record was clean. He has been in and out of 5-star luxury federal resorts ever since for such wonderful things as the manufacturing and distribution of meth, child endangerment, theft, etc. I ended up with a full refund. Right from the start of the story, I could tell where it was headed. The thing is, when drugs are in the picture, this is sadly how it goes most times. When someone's an addict, you want to help. You really do. You pour your heart into it, hoping they'll turn things around. But most of the time, all you end up doing is enabling them, and you risk getting dragged down with them when it all falls apart. He really thought being related would protect him, like, oh, he won't take it that far, he's my brother. Nope, that's exactly what made the revenge sting. Family or not, once someone chooses drugs, they'll sacrifice anyone and anything for it. You just can't trust them. In this case, Opie learned that lesson the hard way. He stood his ground, and his brother is the one who had to face the consequences. It's tough, and honestly, it's kind of pitiful. The time I ruined the life of an online troll. So, I found this guy a while back and have been sharing my story ever since. I saw a comment on my article saying that this would be a good place to post. I'm not entirely proud of what I did to this man's life, but I do think it was justified. I believe that sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. This is the story of the time I ruined the life of an online troll. Now, this may sound extreme, however, I believe it was justified, given the circumstances and nature of my encounter. To understand how I found this individual, I need to take you back to 2015. It was in 2015 that I would spend my days Googling pointless topics. One day, I decided to look up opinions on the meaning of life. I scrolled through various pages of search engine results until I came across the concept of nihilism. What is nihilism? Nihilism interested me because it was unlike any other belief I found in my search for the meaning of life. To put it simply, nihilism is the belief that the world is meaningless. It is a pessimistic approach to life, which suggests that there is no point in life because nothing holds real relevance. Nihilism can make people believe existence does not matter, therefore their actions do not either. Many people view nihilism as a realistic belief that opposes our human nature to seek significance. I wanted to speak to a real-life nihilist and hear their opinions on life. What I found shocked me. Nihilism on social media. Upon discovering nihilism, I joined several Facebook groups surrounding the topic. These groups were full of dumbness. The community was predominantly made up of people who were depressed, or people who would see the humor in depression. The nihilist approach meant that depression was not important because nothing is relevant. This was why suicide jokes were a hit in nihilism groups. I found that the constant sharing of suicide memes meant that people became desensitized to death. People would believe that their existence is meaningless, which is not a good thought to have if you are dealing with genuine depression. I spoke to one individual privately who said they did not want to live anymore. They told me the world is not real, but my sadness is. This made me realize that nihilism and depression are a bad combination. I reassured this person and told them they were important. A few months later, I went to get in touch to see how they were getting on, but I discovered that their Facebook account had vanished. Encountering the troll. Fast forward to mid-2016, and I get a Facebook notification from one of the nihilist groups. It was someone seeking genuine advice to kill themselves. They said they wanted their death to be peaceful, but they were scared. Upon checking the comments of the post, I noticed one person advising them to run into an oncoming train, as this would be painless and fast. The person giving the advice was the troll whose life I went on to ruin. For the remainder of this article, I will refer to the troll as Nigel to protect his identity. At the time, I thought that Nigel was being edgy for the sake of it, but this was not the case. I thought back to the time when I spoke to the person who told me their sadness was real, but the world was not. The fact that they had disappeared off social media gave me goosebumps. I assumed that the worst had happened, and that this could become a recurring story in this group. I decided to look up posts and comments made by Nigel in the group. All the comments turned out to be methods for depressed people to kill themselves. Nigel would give people reassurance that death was the only way out. He would pretend he was doing the people a favor. A distraught man posted that he was ashamed that he kept failing to kill himself. Nigel told him not to beat himself up about it, and that if he worked hard, one day he would be able to do it. Using Facebook as a weapon, I realized that Nigel was not your ordinary troll, and I had to do something to stop him. I created a fake profile to contact Nigel. At this time, I had no intention to ruin his life. I just wanted to stop him from ruining the lives of others. On my fake profile, I told him that I had seen his comments and that they could have a devastating effect. He replied to tell me that he did not care. The first warning. From my understanding, Nigel had the belief that depression was a weakness to humanity. It appeared he was on a mission to weed out the weak members of society. It was almost like he got a buzz from it, some weird kick that motivated him to do it that I could not understand. I warned Nigel that if he continued, there would be repercussions. He told me that he did not care and then blocked my fake profile. I logged into my genuine profile and checked for new posts by Nigel. A day later, I saw that he was back to his old tricks. He was, yet again, giving suicide advice to another mentally tortured soul. The second warning. Nigel had made a crucial mistake by not setting his Facebook profile to private. I was able to see every post that he had ever made, as well as the friends that he had. Nigel was a family man, and made it clear on Facebook how much his wife meant to him. I decided that I would give Nigel his second warning. This time I would make it more personal. This time I wanted to put fear into him. Within 10 minutes, I was able to find Nigel's home address. I decided that I would write a letter to his address. This letter was handwritten to add a personal touch. On the envelope, I addressed the letter to his wife's name, so that he would not be able to simply brush it under the carpet. The letter read the following. Your husband continues to encourage suicide online. He provides methods of suicide for depressed people, and he must be stopped. Could you please let him know that this is his final warning? I will be watching. The letter was sent with the intention of making Nigel stop doing what he does. I thought that this would be the only way that I could get through to him. The more I thought about it, the more I felt guilty that his wife might be living in fear. This was something I did not take into consideration initially. My mission to stop Nigel clouded my thoughts. However, I knew this was necessary for the greater good. The final blow. It had been a month since I wrote the letter, and I had not seen a single post from Nigel. I thought maybe I had finally gotten through to him, but I was wrong. Another month had passed, and Nigel was back at it again. I was disappointed. However, I was not prepared to give up. I reached out to the depressed victims to let them know they had my support. Nigel had to pay for his actions, but how? I decided to take a deeper look into Nigel's personal life. His use of the internet meant that his life was essentially an open book. I was stunned when I discovered that he worked at a care home. He was not someone I could trust in society to care for others. I knew I had to deliver the final blow. Nigel's LinkedIn profile revealed that he was a senior member at a care home. This care home was reputable and risked their reputation by hiring him. I dug deep to pull out a barrage of screenshots I had of Nigel's activity online. After some contemplation, I decided that I would get in touch with the care home via their Facebook page. I logged into the fake profile via proxy and sent the screenshots. I did not believe that he was fit to be trusted with human life. A member of staff replied to say that the case had been handed over to the CEO. The aftermath. A week later, Nigel was no longer on the company website and had also removed the care home from his LinkedIn page. It was clear that his actions had caused him to lose his job. Nigel's relationship status on Facebook had changed from in a relationship to it's complicated. In almost an instant, he had lost his job and damaged his relationship with his family. Nigel had completely stopped posting on Facebook and eventually shut down his Facebook account. This guy's life was turned upside down, and it all stemmed from his actions online. I have comfort in knowing that he will never encourage suicide again. Everybody has their right to an opinion, but nobody has the right to prey on the vulnerable. Do I feel guilty? Of course. But then I remember all of those people that he sought to destroy. This man was in a position of care. What if my actions had saved the life of someone? It is these thoughts that make my guilt fade away. This one is quite interesting. I'd never even heard of nihilism before this, so it was a wild introduction. We've all run into or seen those faceless online trolls. The ones who seem to live for making random people miserable. Usually the best move is to block them and keep it moving. But this guy was on another level of twisted. I'm glad Opie didn't just sit back and ignore it. I wish that dude had gotten arrested, but I doubt it happened. Even with laws against online bullying, it's rare for these weirdos to face actual consequences. What makes the revenge so satisfying is how pathetic the troll's life turned out to be. All that noise, all that toxicity, and it took just one phone call to his job to bring it all crashing down. Talk about poetic justice. Someone stole $25,000 from me. It ended costing him $500,000. A preamble. I was married to a very OCD and pragmatic man. For example, for him, a big romantic gesture had been to leave me alone for 24 hours at the hospital, right after I had our son, so he could go pay bills and mow the lawn. 20 years later, I do understand he really did express love this way. But that's another story. I was in dire need of physical contact because he'd never touched me unless he wanted very bland sex and also never, ever kissed me. The story is not about him, it's only a preamble. So, I divorced him, not just for what's above, mind you. I felt alone and unloved in this relationship. I just wrote about it to explain the state of mind I was in when I met this other person that we'll call PS. PS was the total opposite. He was very in tune with his emotions. He was very, very intense. This will be important later. He really expressed love like I thought I needed. On our first date, the waitress asked how long we had been together since he was so into me and touching me. He made me feel amazing. He had a huge house and a rather flashy lifestyle, so I assumed he was really well off. He told me he owned a car wash and a phone marketing company. Fast forward a bit. At this point, we had been dating for about a year, and he had just asked me and my son to move in with him. I wasn't 100% sure, but he prepared the room for my son nonetheless. As I started spending more time in his house, still keeping mine, I also started to see strange behavior. He'd be up all night, but sleep all day. I also overheard a few phone calls where he was telling people they owed money and needed to pay, but the conversations didn't fit with a car wash or phone marketing business. At some point, he told me he was having money problems. He said huge clients were late in paying and that it was jeopardizing his house payments. So I, stupid me, offered to help. I'm missing a part of this story because it started as me offering help with the house, since we were there a lot. Still had my house, though, but it ended up with me lending him $25,000. I cannot for the life of me remember that progression. The loan was supposed to be for 3 weeks, he said. I'd have it all back in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. That $25,000 came from my retirement savings or my son's college money, so I had to pay a fine to access it. It's also money that took me 10 years to put aside. That money was very important to me. During those 3 weeks, I went out to have drinks with my friends and found him on a date with another woman. I saw him French kissing another woman. I said nothing, went to his house, packed my shit, and left. So anyway, I thought he'd be an adult and would still reimburse the $25,000 at the end of the 3 weeks. Big mistake. Someone I knew told me he was glad I left and proceeded to tell me about him. He said PS was a junkie hooked on GHB, hence why he was so intense and so into his emotions. That also explained the erratic sleep or night patterns, but the final blow was when he told me PS was also a con man, a specialist in defrauding older people by phone, his so-called phone marketing company. In the beginning, I wasn't sure I believed it, but then bits of what I had overheard in the last year started to make sense, and I realized it was all true. Back to this later. I tried getting my money back many different ways. None worked. I was at the end of my rope, and since it was in my year post-divorce, and right after the 2008 to 2009 economic crash as well, I was poor as hell. So this is what I did. First, he had given me access to pay bills online. Not to his bank accounts, but to his emails. So, I was able to investigate all his accounts with the same password. I printed and screenshot every little bit of information relating to money. I found proof that he was indeed scamming people, and found the people he worked with, and even the name of the person at Western Union who facilitated the money transfer. I found out he was an organized criminal. I also found out he did this between the US and Canada. I started preparing strike one. Strike one. For strike one, I printed his face and the faces of everyone working for or with him in defrauding people and left hundreds of flyers in his neighborhood. I also called the hotline for financial crime prevention in both Canada and the US and gave very specific details and names. Know that even if he had given me the money, this goes against my core values and I would have done the same thing either way. At this point, I was preparing strike two too. Strike two. I was dumb in lending him money, but at least I did it the right way. I wrote a check. I didn't do cash. I wanted proof just in case. It would turn out to be a great idea. On the check, I had written that it was a loan. Thank you, Judge Judy, for this tip. Since he didn't pay me back, I prepared an invoice and sent it to myself from his hacked email. When the time came to do my taxes, I filed the $25,000 as an expense using this invoice. I have many freelancers. I slid him as one of them. And it passed. Don't ask me how I got his social security number. I can't remember. But I ended up having access to it, so I ratted him out to the IRS for hiding income. I found out later on through friends that the IRS started investigating him for unpaid taxes. I heard he had to pay 38% taxes on that $25,000 plus a 20% fine for not declaring income. At this point, I was satisfied. I figured $9,500 in taxes plus $5,000 in fines was 50% of what he owed me. At least, he didn't get away with it all. But remember, I told you on the check I had written that it was a loan. So, I took him to court and won. He didn't even show up. So, he has to reimburse the full $25,000 plus court fees, plus what he owes to the IRS. So it's $39,000 that he was to pay for not reimbursing $25,000. To this day, I still haven't seen a cent, but the rest of the story makes it worthwhile. At first, I thought the financial crime call I made had no effect. Well, it's now the cherry on top. What I didn't know at the time is that the IRS would team up with the wire fraud division and look at everything he did. They were not able to catch him on the wire fraud, but since the house he had did not fit with the money he was declaring, they got him on tax evasion and gave him a certain deadline to pay back taxes. I heard it was only 3 months, but I don't know if it's accurate. They got him so good, they ended up freezing his accounts, and he lost his house. The bank foreclosed it, and his debt to the IRS is still open. We are not in the US, so he won't go to jail for this. However, my $25,000 that he did not want to repay ended up costing him over $500,000. And since you cannot go bankrupt for a debt you owe to the government, I'm happy to tell you that at 40 years old, he had to move back with his parents and ask for welfare, and will probably be paying this for the rest of his life. This story is not finished, however. I just learned that he now has a job as a concierge in the apartment building of his parents, so I'll be contacting the court to have the money he owes me taken directly from his pay. The thing is, he has no idea I'm the culprit of all his bad fortune, and he recently sent me a message telling, "'Cause drama, and try to ruin my reputation over Facebook. Now, everyone knows your secret. This is going to be long, but I've been dying to tell this story. It's about how I put a narcissistic woman in her place after being accused of stealing on Facebook. A few years ago, I was involved in one of those swap and sell groups on Facebook. It was specifically for stay-at-home moms and mostly centered around trading and selling clothing, toys, etc. It was an awesome resource because you could get things for your children at a very low price and often make new friends in the process. There was one woman, however, that made the swap and sell group an unpleasant place. We'll call her Kathy. In person, all she ever talked about was herself, specifically about how great she was. She did the same for her kids. She would also slip little hints in about how you or your children were inferior in some way. For example, she would say things like, "Oh, your child's soccer team came in 3rd place last season. My son's team came 1st. But that's not very surprising considering how good he is. I must have done a great job raising him, and it's a shame that others can't do the same with their children." She really would say things like that. In hindsight, she was a narcissist. I'm not just saying that. I'm pretty sure she could be diagnosed. I just did the best I could to avoid her if I saw her in the next aisle of a stall. One day, she saw me with my infant son. He was crying, so she came over and said, "Oh, let me hold him. I can get him to calm down." It was infuriating. Almost everyone hated her. But Kathy really took it to the next level when it came to the swap and sell. She would be the first in line to buy something, only to demand a lower price upon inspection. These clothes look dirtier than what I saw in the picture. I will only pay half. She did this crap all the time, and if the seller didn't oblige, she posted a rant about how they screwed her over. Never do business with them, yada yada. This sort of talk was technically against the rules of the swap and sell, but Kathy was friends with the administrator, so nothing was ever done. The administrator was lazy anyway, and rarely interacted with the group. Furthermore, Kathy had a few cronies that would send PMs to everyone in the group, bad-mouthing sellers who didn't accept Kathy's half-price crap. It was borderline blackmail. I always felt some anxiety when I posted something for sale because I was afraid Kathy would claim it first and then pull her scam, which she did several times. She had Facebook hooked up to her phone, and since she sat at home and did nothing all day, she was fast to jump on items for sale. Oftentimes, she would buy something, and then it would appear for sale months later at a jacked-up price. What made this all the more frustrating was the fact that she was a pastor's wife and had good standing in the community. Nobody knew what a bitch she was, even though she was a toxic and selfish person who cared only about herself. I put up with this woman for 3 years. Then one day I had had enough. I listed a toy for sale. It needed 2 AA batteries to work. Knowing this, I purchased a new pack of batteries and put them in the toy. I tested it. It worked. I said that batteries were included in my listing. Everything seemed to be in order. Within 2 minutes, Kathy jumped in and said she wanted it. She obviously saw it pop up on her phone while she was lounging around at home. The rule said I had to offer it because it was first come, first served, and I could not skip over buyers. So with a heavy heart, I set up a time to bring it to Kathy's house. She refused to meet me halfway or come to my home, as was her custom. I dropped off the toy when I was in town running errands the next day. Kathy didn't try to pull the usual, it looks dirtier than the pic scam, so that was nice. She asked if the batteries were included, and I said yes. I received payment and went about my day. Kathy was playing fair. About damn time. But when I got home, I had 20+ notifications on Facebook. Kathy had tagged me in a post. Oh, this couldn't be good. In her post, she claimed that there were no batteries. She posted a pic of the empty battery slots, shamed me for my shady sales tactics, gave a little sob story about how her chubby 13-year-old soccer star was upset that he couldn't play with it, and demanded her money back. On top of this shitstorm, one of my friends PM'd me, saying that people were receiving messages from Kathy's cronies about how selfish and shady I was. That bitch. I had never been more pissed and hurt in my life. I was done putting up with this chick shit. I responded with a rather lengthy message calling her out on her scams in the past. I said she was a liar for removing the batteries, and that she should be ashamed of herself for behaving in such a manner when she was a pastor's wife. Many people liked my comment, and I knew that the shit was about to hit the fan, but I didn't care anymore. When I logged into Facebook the next day, I had a ton of notifications and messages. My stomach dropped. I skimmed through the messages first. Some were positive, thanking me for calling Kathy out. Some were negative from Kathy's cronies, about what a rude person I was to say those things about her. As for the notifications, most of them stemmed from a single post that had been stickied by the administrator in the swap and sell group. Apparently, she overcame her laziness just long enough to publicly humiliate me. The post said that thieves, yes, thieves, were not tolerated in the group, and then went on to mention me by name. This was no small thing, as there were many women involved in this group, and we were in a small Midwestern town where word traveled fast. My reputation as a mother was being attacked. The post went on to say that, rather than banning me, I had the opportunity to apologize and refund the money I owed. The first comment to the post was from Kathy. She said something that, no doubt, she had been dying to say for a long time. It went something like this. If nothing else, this whole situation just proves that I am better than you. Over 20 people liked the comment. Holy fuck. This shit had to stop. Kathy, the narcissist, was turning the tables and accusing me of actions which were actually hers, an actual case of projection. The time for vengeance had come. The revenge. This requires a bit of explaining. You see, Kathy had a secret, one that I stumbled on by accident several years prior while reading the local newspaper while doing errands in the next town over. In one small corner regarding court happenings, there was a column about a man who had killed his friend while high on bath salts. I don't remember the exact details of the crime, nor did I know what the nature of the court proceedings were. He misses me, that I was an angel for him, and that he regrets what he did. Well, not me, loser. Not me. I'm all about a solid revenge story, and this one's a gem. The fact that he still has no clue it was her who started and was behind the whole thing. I just love it. This is true nuclear revenge. When the villain keeps looking around, wondering why their life is collapsing, and the hero is just sitting there smiling. Hoping she gets every penny of her money back, though. But thanks to the column, I did know that this man had been found mentally unfit to stand trial and sent to the state mental hospital, and I did know the names of his parents, who were present at the hearing. The parents, strangely enough, had the exact same names as Kathy and her husband. I did some Googling and discovered that this man was Kathy's oldest son. Kathy never mentioned having another son, for obvious reasons. This crime happened when Kathy and her family were living in this other town soon after her son was sent to the mental ward. Kathy and her husband moved away to my town. I knew that she had lived elsewhere before joining the swap and sell, but I didn't know that she had moved to distance herself and her husband from their dark secret. This was my short and sweet response to Kathy's comment. I still remember it word for word. Kathy, you've asked me to apologize for actions that were yours, and then have the audacity to say that you're better than me. But what's funny, Kathy, is that the son you raised turned out to be a lunatic murderer. I will always be better than you. And I posted a link to the old news article. I did not stick around to watch everything go down, as I was sick of the drama. I removed myself from the group and went about my day. The aftermath. I received a phone call from a close friend in the evening, and I learned what had happened. After I posted the link to the article about Kathy's son, the comments section absolutely blew up. Kathy and her cronies posted several comments where the group administrator was tagged, demanding that my comment be deleted. My friend said that there were several posts like this, and they started to sound pretty desperate near the end. The lazy administrator, of course, was slow to respond. Kathy even said something about driving to the administrator's house, since she was not returning her phone calls. After a couple of hours, the whole swap and sell group was deleted, but the damage was done. As for what happened to Kathy, I never had the chance to find out, as she deleted her Facebook account. I saw her in the grocery store a few weeks later, but she just flipped me off and walked the other way. My friends and I founded a new swap and sell group. It gets bigger every day, but Kathy is not a part of it. Oh man. Classic Facebook drama at its finest. I just can't deal with people like Kathy. She totally had it coming, practically begging for it even. Plus, she's out here giving religious folks a bad name. I bet Opie was savoring every second of that revenge. And honestly, who could blame her? Still, it's pretty humiliating for Kathy. Am I weird for feeling a tiny bit bad about it? Neighbor poisons dog, gets what's coming to him. First post, long-time lurker here, but I believe you guys would like this story. This is not my story, but that of a good friend of mine, let's call him Mitch, whom I've known for many, many years now. This happened 15 years ago, when Mitch and I were both 16 years old. Mitch has two younger brothers, who were 14 and 15 years old at the time. Mitch and his brothers had the most beautiful golden lab, always friendly, a bit lazy as labs can be, loved everybody, truly a great dog. The neighbor, though, hated the dog. Something about its fur getting on his lawn when it shed. I live in a warm Mediterranean country, so dogs tend to shed a lot here. Something about it barking during siesta. In any case, the neighbor was being a bitch about it. Now, Mitch's parents are of the quiet type, trying to accommodate. They even put a fence inside their own yard to keep the dog on the other side of the yard, facing the property of the other neighbor, who had no issues with their dog. They kept the dog inside during siestas, and Mitch and his brothers would brush the undercoat regularly during the summer months to limit any shedding. To make a long story short, one day, they came back home after a day trip and found the dog convulsing and foaming in their yard, dying soon after. They immediately knew what had happened, as the telltale signs of a poisoned dog were all too familiar to the father, who had witnessed it time and time again in his youth, when the local police would poison stray dogs during the 50s and 60s to contain an outbreak of rabies. Mitch and his brothers were inconsolable. Their parents confronted the neighbor, who, without admitting guilt, said something along the lines of, "The dog had it coming." The parents, for reasons unknown, probably to avoid any prolonged legal battle or to just put an end to the story, decided not to press charges, which forced Mitch and his brothers to take the appropriate action they believed the neighbor deserved. I'm not saying that I condone what they did, but let's say that as a dog lover it still brings a smile to my face 15 years later. They waited patiently for 3 days after the event, when the neighbor and his wife, their children, had moved out a few years prior, went out for the night. Small parenthesis, all three were, and still are, some of the kindest and most thoughtful boys or men that I know, but I digress. They waited for the neighbors to go out for the night, and that's when they broke into the house and started to systematically destroy everything the neighbors owned. Electronics, furniture, drapes, carpets, bed linens, everything. They spent a good hour in the neighbor's house wreaking havoc. Mitch later told me that it was very meticulous and systematic. All three were crying, and just moving on to the next object to break, shear, or tear. They then sat outside on the porch and waited. Some time later the neighbor came back home, and they just stared at him and smiled, waving to him. As he entered his house with his wife, he never pressed charges either. Mitch's parents now have 3 golden labs in the yard, and have always had dogs since then. As far as I know, they never really had issues with the neighbor either. This one's tough to stomach. Nothing pisses you off than hearing about someone hurting an innocent animal. It just makes your blood boil right away. But that revenge was definitely unhinged. Absolute perfection, 10 out of 10. It's dark, sure, but I'm glad the neighbor faced some consequences. I mean, he couldn't even fight back. Ex and boyfriend hurt my daughter, tarnish my friend's reputation, and I seek revenge. To start off, this is a throwaway, as I don't want it to tie back to me. Also, buckle up. This is going to be a long ride. These events took place over several years. I hope it is worth the read. I am going to begin with the main players. Me, my ex-wife Pepper, revenge target number 1. Her boyfriend Steve, revenge target number 2. The boyfriend's ex-wife Maria, co-partner in the revenge, my daughter Sarah, and my friend Jason, accomplice in the revenge. With that set, let's get some backstory out of the way. Pepper and I had a very up and down marriage. It was one of those where I was madly in love with her, but looking back I think she was in it more for the money and convenience. She had one son, we'll call Drug, because he was and still is a major drug addict before we got married. And I also had one son, name is unimportant, that I had full custody of. While married, we had Sarah. I toughed the marriage out for as long as I could, but eventually we just couldn't keep it together. We separated, and due to traveling some for work and having custody of my son, I moved back to my hometown a few states away so my parents could help, but kept an apartment in the town that Pepper and Sarah lived in, so that I could still spend as much time with my daughter as I could. At this time, I asked my best friend Jason, who is a lawyer and owns his own firm, to draw up a child support agreement for us. It is very important to note that we only addressed child support. It had nothing about custody or visitation or anything else in it. So for about a year, this was how it would work. I would spend a month with Sarah while my parents watched my other son. Then I would spend a month with my son. Almost exactly a year later, I could no longer afford to keep 2 households, and Pepper was wanting to move back to her hometown, which was in a different state, but closer to where I lived. So I gave up the apartment and she moved. The new situation continued for a couple more years. Pepper and I remained friendly, and even tried to reconcile the relationship a couple of times, but it wouldn't work out. I was still deeply in love with her, but we couldn't come to an agreement on things like where to live and such. I forced myself to try and move on and started dating. She had been dating basically from the day after I moved out. Even though I still loved her, our relationship moved more into good friends than husband and wife. So she finally meets Steve. I was never told much about Steve other than that he was a certified ethical hacker, and that is what he did for employment, important later. While they were dating, she would send me texts about their dates. She even texted me the day they first had sex together. This hurt deeply, and looking back, I think this is what she wanted, but I tried to play the part of a good friend and confidant. Steve and Pepper had been dating for 6 months when, out of the blue, she tells me they broke up, and she realized that she is madly in love with me. Since it's at the beginning of summer, she packs some suitcases and heads to my state. They were going to spend the summer with me and see if they liked it or not. We had an amazing summer. All the kids were getting along. Drug even loved it here. So she makes it official. We are back together and they are moving in. We went and registered my daughter for school. We even were able to get her on a Pee-wee cheerleading team for the summer. She made several friends and was loving being here. There was only one problem. Pepper still had an apartment that had all her furniture and stuff in it. I offered to go up with my truck and help load everything, but she insisted that she and Drug could get it done. So off they go to pack up and then head to their new home. As you can guess, things didn't go as planned. She was home for about 3 days when she informs me that under no circumstance will she move, and that she and Steve are in love and are moving in with each other. To say I was destroyed was an understatement. I couldn't understand why she had done it. The worst part was that she left it to me to tell Sarah the bad news. When I told her, the devastated look on her face started turning my feelings of hurt into feelings of anger. Then Sarah broke down and started begging to stay with me and started spilling the beans. She told me things about how her mom would leave with Steve for days and leave Drug in charge. She had to learn how to cook for herself at 8 because Drug would spend the money on, well, drugs and spend the whole time high. If Drug wasn't left in charge, Peppa would use her multiple convicted felon niece to watch her. She also told me about the first time that she had met Steve. He came to their house, basically said hello, and he and her mum disappeared into the bedroom and started having loud sex. Sarah was outside the door bawling, and they just ignored her and continued. This is how my 8-year-old learned of sex, and she is still in counseling trying to recover 7 years later. At this point, my anger turned to rage. I immediately notified Pepper that there was no way Sarah was coming back, and I would fight her to the death to keep her out of that situation. Pepper responded by getting an emergency hearing in her state to force Sarah back. I had to scramble, but I managed to get a lawyer and easily won the hearing, which Pepper showed up late for, and told the judge it was due to a disability. The judge agreed that since there was no custody agreement, and with the troubling accusations that I had gathered, it was best for now for Sarah to stay with me. I had won the first battle, but it was short-lived. Within an hour of the hearing, I started getting tons of phishing emails and texts. I was also getting password resets and MFA codes from my bank, Facebook, Reddit, and any other accounts. I knew that Steve was behind it. The very next day, Jason calls. His law firm's website, email, and phone account had been hacked. Because he had to disclose the hack to the court, and because he was working on a semi-high-profile case at the time, the FBI got involved. To say I was enraged was an understatement. These two people had destroyed me, harmed my daughter, and tarnished the reputation of my lifelong friend. It was time for them to pay, and pay dearly. I was a man on a mission. I spent hours digging up as much dirt as I could on Steve and Pepper. I had a lot of luck with Pepper. I found social media posts of her out late, drinking that correlated to tardiness and missed days at school for Sarah. I found tons of pictures of her and two strange kids doing fun activities. I found neighbors who were willing to testify that Sarah had to come beg for food because she was left with either Drug or the felon. I knew I could bury her. Steve, on the other hand, had all his accounts locked down. I couldn't find any dirt, and it was driving me crazy. Then it hit me. Try LinkedIn. It paid off. There wasn't much posted, but through his account, I found Maria, his ex-wife's account. I reached out to her, and she happily accepted. Maria and I became fast friends. She hated Pepper for good reason, as they had both abandoned her kids like my daughter, and didn't want her around her kids. I learned so much. To keep it short, Maria and Steve had recently divorced. As part of the custody agreement, Steve got the house, car, bank account, savings, and a lower than usual child support. Maria had traded all that money to have control of the kids. She knew he was a scumbag, and all she was concerned about was keeping her kids safe. They had a very detailed custody agreement with rules for Steve to follow. As part of that agreement, if Steve broke any rules, then he had to pay, and pay dearly. He had to sell the house and give her half of everything. His child support would also double, and Steve would be financially ruined. Steve also didn't have her blocked on social media, and would regularly send texts bragging about how great his life was without her. Many of those texts had pictures of Pepper in them. We compared notes, we swapped evidence, we came up with a plan. And now it is time for revenge. First, I got with Jason. He let the FBI investigator know that I had also had some hacking attempts, and we believed it was the same person. The investigator called quickly. I gave him all the information I had, and who I believed was doing it, and he asked a weird question: do I know where Steve worked? Well, yes I did, thanks to Maria, so apparently Steve wasn't as good hacker as he thought himself to be. They had already traced back the hack on Jason to a business, the very same business Steve worked for. As soon as my conversation with the FBI was done, I called his work to lodge a complaint. I told the manager that someone was trying to hack me, and I was sure it was Steve. They, of course, did not take it too seriously because I had no proof. What they didn't know was that they were soon going to be getting a visit from a special agent. The next week was absolute hell for Steve and Pepper. Pepper got served with divorce papers, and her lawyer got served with all the evidence I had gathered. My lawyer said it was the most complete investigation he had ever seen. I had all 40 tardiness incidents and 19 absences tied to nights out drinking with Steve. I had hard proof of them abandoning my daughter for days at a time. Maria even gave me a picture that was taken at 2 a.m. the night before the emergency hearing with Steve and Pepper drinking in a tattoo parlor, the same hearing she was late to, and said it was due to a disability. Steve got served that he had violated the entire custody agreement. Maria had pictures from me proving he was with Pepper on nights the kids were with him, and they were left alone. She also had proof that there was contact with Pepper that violated the custody agreement. The fallout was awesome to watch. Steve was fired between my complaint, another older complaint of him hacking, and the FBI showing up. They had no choice but to fire him. He did avoid any legal issues as the FBI could never tie it directly to him. The word spread of why he was fired, and no one would hire him in an IT job again. He had to sell the house, liquidate all the investments and bank accounts, and give half to Maria. His child support got to stay the same, since he no longer had a source of income. Last I heard, he was working at a grocery store. So in total, his income went from $200,000 plus a year to less than $40,000. As for Pepper, the divorce was swift and painful for her. The judge ruled in my favor for all counts. I got sole custody and sole decision-making. She was forced to go to counseling, and she and Drug can only visit Sarah with a third-party supervisor paid for by Pepper. Sarah is doing much better. She still needs counseling, but she thrives in school and has many friends. She very rarely sees her mom, but she is much better off without her. A great story about a parent fighting for their kid. Opie went full-on nuclear. Lawyers, FBI, custody battles, and loads of evidence. He didn't stop until they lost it all. I mean, hacker dude literally went from a 6-figure job to bagging groceries, and the ex lost custody of their daughter. Knowing what they put that poor girl through, it feels less like revenge and more like straight-up justice. I'm glad she's doing great. And that wraps up another set of these unhinged Reddit revenge confessions and stories. Some of these were so satisfying, but a little over the top. I can't tell if I should be impressed or just a little concerned. If you liked this one, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. I've still got plenty of chaotic stories lined up, so stick around. Next compilation might just be even wilder. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.